when we talk about ethnic minorities, we're looking at a group that has different national or cultural traditions from the main population. I hope that I put it in this slide. I think I did. What I'm going to show you guys later on is that you may have seen in the news, or if you follow certain things, or if you talk about this in class, that the United States is not going to be, there's not going to be a majority in the United States around the year 2050. Excuse me. What's going to happen is that the white population, if y'all studied this in Unit 2, right? The white population is at replacement level, maybe even lower than replacement level in some parts of the country. And as time goes on, over time, we're going to have less than 2.1 kids, total fertility rate, being born to white families. What I'm saying here is that white population is really kind of staying where it is, or even in decline. Whereas, in particular, Hispanics, other Asian groups, or other groups coming into the United States, or other lower income groups are growing more rapidly in their population. And when I say lower income, I mean mainly like maybe second born or second generation immigrants. Okay, maybe among other groups. Well, the point I'm trying to make is that there's going to be, because of migration and because of natural increase in minority groups, you're going to see a population become way more balanced in the United States, to the point that the white majority, right now we're somewhere around 57% white in the United States, is going to be more like a 49% minority. So we're going to be a large minority white country, but everyone's going to be a minority, because we're going to be less than that 50%, making there be no clear majority in the United States. That's what we're talking about here. So I wanted to make that point as well, that we are becoming more and more culturally diverse as time goes on in our country. Here's a map that shows our country by ethnicity, and this one here, we're looking at all kinds of different ethnicities. Now, it's really hard to see. You got Dutch, English, Finnish, French, German, Hispanic, Irish, and so on, Mexican, Norwegian, Puerto Rican. All right, a bunch of different groups represented here on this map. Usually, we probably just branch all these different European groups as white. We think about African Americans living in mainly the U.S. South, and also keep in mind, we're going to look at this a little bit more closely on. You've got large centers of population over here in some of these counties where large cities exist in other parts of the country as well. And then you've got large numbers of Hispanic groups on the southern portion of the United States, as well as in parts of the Panhandle of Florida, and in other parts of the United States as well. This right here shows the same information in the form of a chart. Okay. Now, again, keep in mind that these groups, German, Irish, English, Italian, even Polish, French, Scottish, these are all going to be groups that we have over time assimilated completely into American culture, so that we look at all these individuals from these different walks of life, or these different ancestries, and we think, oh, they're white dudes, okay, or they all look, or we classify them as white. And when we say white, we're talking about a race, but we kind of mean a ethnicity. Though the ethnicity word for that may be Caucasian, okay, someone of white European or Anglo-European descent. Another thing that I want to point out too, while we're talking about, is when you look at Mexican, notice it says of any race, okay? So you've got varying skin colors. When we talk about race, we're talking about physical attributes, varying skin colors of people living within Mexico. So it might be Mexican be black, it might be Mexican be white. So often in your same for Puerto Rican, usually you'll see something that says Hispanic white or Hispanic non-white to kind of break down this ethnic variation whenever you're filling out a form. All right. And so we've all filled out forms, and we see these different types of categorizations or classifications. The point that I'm trying to make here before I move on is that when you look at people within any one country on earth, there is going to be different identities within the geographic breakdown of any one country on a smaller scale. And also when you look at Central and South America, for example, and you summarize all these individuals as Mexican, that right there is incredibly, inaccurate, also incredibly insulting to people from wherever they might be, that their culture is not seen as important enough to have its own identity. So when we classify something very broadly like this, we need to do it sensitively and also recognize that there is a lot of cultural nuance and a lot of different identity factors that go into that. Here's another example of the ethnic diversity of Iran. Now, this is the Islamic Republic of Iran. We already talked about this last week, that these guys are Muslim, but not only are they Muslim, what branch of Islam are they? Anybody remember? Put it in the comments. What branch of Islam do we have primarily in the Islamic Republic of Iran? Remember, there were two that we talked about more than the others. Two that you really need to know. Nobody remembers. They're Shia Islam. All right. So primarily, like 90%, somewhere around 90% of Iran is going to be Shia Muslim. All right. But then you've got these other groups along the outer perimeters of the country, even within, that may be something different. For example, you look at the Kurds up here. We're going to talk more about them later on in this presentation. Kurds they're not Arab either. So not only are they not Shia, but they're not Arab. All right, they're Kurdish. They're a completely different ethnic group with a different language, a different history, a different culture, really altogether. They're not in any way similar to the Iranians. That's why there's a lot of controversy with their existence as well. We're going to talk more about. Here is the country of Myanmar. Some of you might know it as Burma. I don't know how much y'all watch the news or how much y'all may have talked about this when you look at migration in Unit 2. But I always spent time, I spent time a lot last year in my own classroom looking at the Rohingya Muslims. Now, in Myanmar, the majority of individuals here, and you can see you have a very ethnically diverse country, but the majority here are going to be Buddhist. And you think usually that Buddhism is very, very passive, a very, very peaceful type religion. But in this particular case, the Rohingya Muslims that live over here in this region are heavily persecuted against by the Buddhist majority, to the point that even there are cases of perhaps ethnic cleansing that would go on. Regardless, there has been a massive migration, as many of, maybe even a diaspora, if you want to use that word there. Many of these Muslims have moved into neighboring Bangladesh or have gone into some of the islands down here in the in Oceania region, trying to get out. And they're staying in refugee camps and things. It's really kind of a big deal. It's because of ethnic differences. They don't fit in with the majority here being your Buddhist majority. And so they are oppressed as a minority group within Myanmar. So this happens worldwide. It probably happens more in countries where development is an issue as well. Even still, if you want to really look at a crazy and diverse ethnic situation, go no further than Africa, mainly Sub-Saharan Africa. And we're going to look more at this as well towards the end if I have enough time. But you can see this clear transition. I actually have a slide later on that shows the transition zone. It is a geographic zone in Africa that is right south of the Sahara Desert. All right. But not only is it a geographic transition zone, it is also quite, literally a cultural transition zone as well. Most of the people in the north, even though you still got a lot of ethnic variation, most of the people in the north are going to be Arabic. A lot of them are going to be Muslim. They speak Arabic. All right. Once you get south of the Sahara, we call this region Sub-Saharan Africa, you can see that the ethnic diversity becomes way more amplified. You've got tons of ethnic variation, and they don't follow the political barriers. You can kind of see the political boundaries a little bit overlaid on this map, That's a major problem. When you have all these different ethnic identities, ethnic groups living within a single boundary or even split by boundaries, because Africa's boundaries were decided at the Berlin Conference with by a bunch of Europeans. They had no care whatsoever about the ethnic diversity in Africa. That causes major political problems today that we still see in places like Rwanda, in places like South Sudan, in places all throughout the continent. Looking more at the United States, once again, we want to look at the racial profile of the United States in 2045. Here's what I was talking about a little while ago, where you're going to see the white majority become a large minority group. Right? When I say minority, it's going to be less than half the population. Even though it makes up the largest group, it is still not going to be half of the population. That's the reason why we're calling this 49.7% in 2045 a minority. Is everybody clear on that? Because yes, it's still going to be a majority, it's still be a large minority of whites, almost 50%. But in order for something to be a majority, it's got to be 50% or more. And that's the connection I'm trying to make. And also keep in mind here, look at these different groups here. Black, again, we already talked about as a racial classification, but when we use it in this context, we're looking at really African Americans. Gotta be careful with that though, because we just talked about how you can be Black and Hispanic. When I was in college, I had a friend of mine who would often be classified as Black, but he's from Sri Lanka. All right, and he felt like people automatically would look at him, and even though he didn't look African American whatsoever, he would be classified as African American. He felt like people didn't take the time to understand his ethnic identity until they talked to him and heard his thick Sri Lankan accents. All right, so Black, again, doesn't necessarily mean African American, but the way we use it, it usually does. So that's another thing that makes race and ethnicity so complicated, is the way that we tend to interchangeably mix the two. In the green, you've got your Asian. Now, again, Asian is very, very broad. We use this as an ethnic classification in the United States. The majority of Asians in the United States are going to be Chinese. They're not the same as Korean, not the same as Japanese, not the same as Indian. Indians are Asians, y'all. Indians are from South Asia. If you're from Pakistan, you're from South Asia. If you're from Bangladesh, South Asia. So there's a lot of different ethnic groups and different identities and different nationalities, to use a word on that to talk about, that make up this Asian demographic within the United States. But also know that we got about 8% of our population is going to be Asian. This again is looking at 2045. So maybe I should, I think I've got these numbers in current. I hope I do later on in the presentation. All right, so ethnic groups are going to be based on cultural factors. Just to kind of review what we already talked about. Asian Americans, that's a really, really broad term, like I just said. Jews, racially and nationally diverse, but are bound together by common religion, customs, and values. Language, the Hebrew language is a big part of that. Usually, if you're going to be Jewish, you're going to learn at least enough Hebrew to read the Torah. That is, if you ever go to synagogue, the Torah is actually read in Hebrew. It's pretty cool. They use I don't know if you guys ever seen a Torah scroll, but they use a little pointer. I can't even remember what it's called. But it looks really cool. It's very cool. I had a college class where it was taught by a rabbi, and we spent a little bit of time in the synagogue.